You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's Books and Comic Show for Star Trek, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing. And with me this week, I'm so excited to be with this guy, as we're going to be talking about a really fun comic, the one, the only, the masterful Christopher Jones.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I'm one of the other hosts here on Literary Treks, I guess, and I hope you don't mind, but I brought a bunch of critters with me today for this discussion. I promise they won't cause any problems.
You said that last time, Chris, and it ate half the ship.
Well, that's because we didn't have Tassel's help last time.
Oh, okay, so good. As long as you've brought her and Core with you, I think we'll be okay. So, well, I'm really excited. This week, we talked in our last episode, Bruce and I, about all the news. There was so much news to talk about. So that means this week we don't really there hasn't been anything really announced. And so we're going to be able to dive right into the show. And I'm really excited because I've been wanting to cover this comic for quite a while, Chris, ever since I saw them re-release it, IDW. And man, I'm excited to talk about Debt of Honor. And as I think, for me, and I know for you, when we're reading the comics, art is such a key part of these stories. And if the art doesn't work, it really hurts the story in many ways. And so I wanted to start off with that and what you thought of the artwork here, because we have Adam T. Hughes and Carl C. Story as the artists, and Tom C. McCraw as the colorist. What did you think of their work here in Debt of Honor?
Well, I quite enjoyed it. It's a style that's a bit different than what we've grown accustomed to with the more recent IDW comics. For me, it's a bit nostalgic because it's that style that I kind of grew up reading over the years a bit more. So I really liked it. And, for the most part, most of the time in here, you get likenesses such that the characters feel real to you. Occasionally there's, one where it's a little bit off, but for the most part, it works really well. And in this comic in particular, because they have so many moments of flashbacks where they take us to events that we either saw on screen or to events that we didn't see but were referenced, such as the sequences that we get aboard the Farragut, they have an opportunity to draw all the different uniforms that we saw from the original series all the way through the motion picture and then the later TOS films. And that's really fun to see the artists get to play around with those a bit.
Yeah, I like that you pointed that out about how this comic gives the artists the ability to explore every area of the original series, from start, even before the start, really. I mean, all the way to, what we see right there between, movies 4 and 5, which is just so cool. And I have to say, it is in some ways quite nostalgic, the art, because I was just, for Valentine's Day, my wife got me the first collection of Man of Steel, which is the John Byrne's run there for Superman from the late 80s. And the art is very similar to this. But there was something just really special, I thought. I mean, the pages here are so good. And the likenesses, it does a perfect job of blending art with making sure that the character looks like they do in the show. Mm-hmm. And just some of the splash pages that we get. I mean, just as a reference, it's page 3, and it's that beautiful page of the Enterprise breaking up as Kirk is
Right.
kind of having this nightmare of, being back on the Genesis planet. It's incredible. Like, it really is. The amount of work that probably went into this page is astounding. So, to me, I mean, the art alone in this comic, I think, makes it worth reading. I mean, even if I didn't like the story, which, spoiler alert, I do, I think that the art for this comic is outstanding. And it's the kind of art to which, man, I would love to have a major splash page from this, on the wall. That's the kind of comic book art that I love, and so I couldn't be more complimentary for what we get in this comic art-wise.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So the story itself, Chris, takes place right after Star Trek 4, before we get to Star Trek 5. And so the framing device here for the story is the fact that Kirk is on the ocean. He's with Gillian Taylor, and they're on a cruise together. He doesn't have a ship right now. The Enterprise A isn't ready, and they're basically on kind of an extended vacation that's allowing them to keep track of Gracie and George. And so I really appreciated this because it allows us to get introduced to the place and the mindset that Kirk is in with everything that has happened over the last, year of his life. And he is still processing not only the loss of his son, but honestly, he's still processing the loss of the Enterprise, which has meant so much to him. And I thought that this was such a great framing device for which they're going to use to kind of let us do flashbacks and then kind of have the story move forward in the present time as well.
Yeah, and I feel like this story overall is maybe more about him coming to terms with the loss of the Enterprise rather than the loss of his son.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Or any of the other crew with whom he served over the years. Early on, he's on the boat with Gillian, and he says that the Enterprise was just a ship, and Gillian says, well, the Enterprise was your ship, Captain. She served you well and faithfully, and you killed her. And, of course, that moment in Star Trek 3 when he does decide to destroy the Enterprise, it's one of my favorite moments in all of Star Trek. I think it's one of the most moving scenes in Star Trek emotionally. And the reason is because that for Kirk, the Enterprise is his first love, and he would not destroy her unless it was the absolute only move he had left. And that scene when they're down on the planet looking up, and he asks Bones, my God, what have I done? And Bones says, what you always do, what you had to do. You turn death into a fighting chance to live. And you see the Enterprise streaking through the sky, burning up in the atmosphere. One of the best scenes ever in Star Trek. And that decision seems to just really eat away at him over time. And not that much time has passed, of course, between that moment and what we see here, because what happens throughout the movie, they are on Vulcan for a little while, but it's a relatively short amount of time, right? All this stuff has happened to him. And if you go back to the beginning of Star Trek 2, Kirk is struggling with the fact that he's aging and he's reflecting on the decisions that he's made in his life. And then suddenly he's torn out of that and he's sent on this grand adventure in which Spock dies and he has to get Spock back, and then they have to save the Earth. And now suddenly he's got this moment to catch his breath again, and you see that he's kind of reflecting on the same things, except there are a few additional things that have happened to him.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what's kind of nice about this framing device too is that obviously having Gillian there helps juxtapose the characters in the sense that they're both going through something kind of similar, which, Kirk's life for the last, 20 years has been on the Enterprise, the same ship, Yes, it was refit, but for him, it was home. It was everything. It's where his family is, and the same thing with Gillian. She's given up the entire world that she knew and has been brought to somewhere completely different, and now is having to figure out how to live in a whole different century, So both of them are going through these major life changes. And so, again, I think what makes this comic really good is that the framing device actually really works. And I think what I really like about this is that it does give some more depth to the relationship between Jillian and Kirk, and that it's not just a sexual relationship that they have. They really have this friendship because she does understand in many ways what he's going through in a way that many other people never would, because of the experiences they've both been through and now where they find themselves. And so I think, even just literarily, this is a wonderfully set up comic to then shoot us forward and have all of these things begin to connect together, which is going to bring us back to the present for, the conclusion.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point, comparing the experiences of each of them and getting to see a bit more of them together, because on screen, we don't really learn anything else other than
right.
She goes off, she gets assigned to a ship, and she has to figure out how to learn or how to live in the 23rd century. And then Kirk goes and climbs a rock. And,
Yeah. Well, and I think, the thing that is kind of beautiful about this is that it is interesting to see there was this adventure right before Star Trek V, and I think it actually plays out pretty well for the most part. It doesn't make quite as much sense because the Enterprise seems to be in pretty tip-top shape, so that,
Right.
When they get to the Enterprise in Star Trek V and everything's not working right, it's like, what's going on here? But
that's because there were still critters in the walls, Matthew.
That's probably it.
Little
That's probably
baby
it.
critters were in there
Yes,
chewing on the cables
there
and
you
things.
go.
Yeah.
There you go. So the big part of this comic before it kind of truly transitions back to the present is the flashbacks that we get. And the very first flashback that we get is back to Kirk's time before even the Enterprise on the Farragut for his first go on a Constitution-class starship. And the Farragut has been attacked, and Kirk finds himself in a place where he feels guilty for it. In fact, the captain has been killed. And he feels guilty for the fact that he didn't shoot first and then ask questions later. And they are trying to repair the ship because the warp drive's inoperable, of course, as always in Star Trek. And the acting captain makes Kirk work with one of their passengers that happens to be an engineer as well, but she's Vulcan. And so Kirk's first time to really work with a Vulcan, and it turns out to be this woman named Tassel, who is going to be very important for the rest of the story.
I thought the use of this particular moment as a flashback was interesting because it also establishes the time frame again. So we just talked about how the events that when Kirk leaves Jillian on the boat and goes up to the Enterprise A, that's in between Star Trek 4 and Star Trek 5, and it's actually when the Enterprise A is just getting into position to leave space dock, and they're going to move it over near the moon just to kind of keep it over there for a while. So that establishes strongly the timeline. And then here, what's happening on the Farragut ties into the episode Obsession from the original series, where the draconium cloud is sucking the red blood cells out of people. And if you remember that episode, Kirk tells Spock to check the tapes from the Farragut because this kind of thing happened before. But that's all we know about it. So here we learn, okay, well, Kirk was a lieutenant aboard the Farragut, and this puts the story 11 years before Obsession. So we actually know where this is very concretely on the timeline, where these events are happening. And plus, we're filling in gaps in the original series that we didn't know about before. So I thought that the use of that setting of the Farragut was a nice choice to help really solidify everything.
Yes.
So this these events in Kirk's life feel more real because it's not just something random. It's not a random mission. It is a mission we didn't see before, but it is connected to something that we do know. And so that was a nice touch.
Yeah, honestly, it kind of feels like the thing that, Christopher L. Bennett likes to do in his novels, where he likes to connect a lot of different things together to create a story, from episodes And so I think that's one of the things that, I really like about the comic is that it's doing this with these different stories. And they're deep cuts, right? Like, this is not something that, unless you are paying attention or you just know TOS inside and out, you might miss that, right? And so I think that's what makes this really cool as well, is that it's perfect for anybody who's just vaguely familiar with Star Trek, but it's also very rewarding then for those who are steeped in Star Trek lore. And I think that's what makes this really exciting. And of course, too, we have this interesting relationship forming with Kirk and his first time to really be working with a Vulcan. And in fact, I love they even kind of talk about how she was interested in meeting Spock, and because she's heard a lot about him because he's the first Vulcan in Starfleet. And so I found that really interesting. And they create this really interesting working relationship. In fact, the acting captain even talks about how the work that Tressel and Kirk are doing together has been exemplary, and they're working very well together. And everything seems to be going okay, and that is until these very strange creatures attack the Enterprise. And, it looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon showed up, basically, and or some space bugs. Maybe the space lice.
Bugs.
Yeah.
Space lice. So I'm picturing, if these are space lice, I'm picturing that somewhere out there's some planet where the people are really huge and giant heads to have these guys crawling around in their hair.
It's crazy because they just kind of come out of nowhere. They attack the Farragut. And so the way in which they are going to beat these alien creatures we don't ever get a name for them, is to get everybody they can to the saucer section and then separate the saucer. And that becomes Kirk and Tressel's mission, which is to separate the saucer so that they can save everybody, regardless of whether or not they can save themselves. So this also sets up a theme we're going to see here throughout Kirk's life, which is making tough decisions, especially since he was told by Marwood, one of the officers, to save themselves, and then she gets sucked into this weird, I don't know, honey trap. It looks very strange.
Yeah, I would like to talk about the critters a little bit at some point and what they're doing, how they infiltrate Federation space and attack others, and kind of how that storyline thread takes us through the book as well. We can do that later if you want, but I am curious about your thoughts on that because for me, it felt like an element that it's put in there to create a crisis that Kirk must deal with at various points throughout his life, and especially that keeps bringing Kirk and Tessel back together. But it's not at all the core of the story for me. The core of the story is Kirk's life and what he's dealing with in terms of regrets over decisions that he's made and the debt of honor, of course, of the title of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely have an opportunity to be able to talk about them a little bit more, where they kind of reveal how they, are doing all of this. But suffice it to say, we have Kirk and Tressel go on this mission to separate the saucer. They are able to do so, but at the expense of themselves, and they both really almost die in this mission. And Kirk is about to die. And there's this really interesting thing which happens is, obviously, it's not told exactly how long the Farragut has been in the position that they've been in, but you get the feeling like they've been kind of limping along for a while. so that this relationship has been building with Tricell and Kirk. And so when they find themselves on a escape pod, it creates a moment for them to share some time together, apparently.
Right. Well, and that could be important later on. Of course, you know, we don't see Kirk making out with Tricell. We see Tricell kissing Kirk. She's formed a bond with him through this mission that carries through the story, carries through many, many years of their lives, carries through many, it feels like big changes in her life over the years, even more so than in Kirk's life, perhaps because Kirk is more in this structured environment of Starfleet, whereas she's more of a rogue on her own. She doesn't fit in with the Romulans, with the fleet, you know, as a captain, as the way that some other Romulans might. She kind of has her own mindset, which I think stems a lot from the fact that, and I don't think we've actually stated this yet in our discussion, but she's half Romulan and half Vulcan, which is revealed along the way here. But before we get away from this part of the story on the Farragut, there's something she says which raised a completely different question in my mind, and I don't know if we want to talk about it right now, but it does connect a bit with how Kirk is seeing things as he reflects on his life. And Tricell, she says to Kirk, it's on page 14, she says, "While some consider it admirable to seek perfection in all aspects of being, the rude reality of existence is that we are all finite and fallible." And it made me think that we see young Kirk, here he's a lieutenant on the Farragut, and then we see Kirk later on when he's an admiral, then he's been demoted to captain, he's reflecting on his life. And I was thinking about the real world and how sort of this this idealism of youth that people have, especially say in their 20s, even in their 30s, kind of gives way to realism and apathy as you age and as things happen to you and as you work your way through the realities of how the world works. And I started thinking a bit about Kirk and him reflecting on that and maybe thinking about things that he wanted to do, especially the way he felt about what happened on the Farragut. And then the decisions that he had to make over the years as the captain that maybe went against what he really wanted to do, but he had to do those because that's the nature of reality.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I do think that's not a line that you would probably get much anymore, you know, to admit that we are flawed beings. You know, there's nothing perfect about us, you know, and all of life really is about learning from all of the experiences we have and continuing then to strive to be a better person by learning from those. And that's really, I think, obviously, TOS was very much in that mold as well. You know, these were not perfect characters. They were ones who were being formed and shaped by the experiences that they had. And I think that's what kind of made it so relatable to so many people. And I think that speaks to deliberately then to, you know, when Kirk gets back to the Federation, because they're on a base... since they were near the Romulan neutral zone, the Federation had these bases that they had set up, and Tricell and Kirk are able to make it there, and she puts him in stasis so that she can go and confront the Romulans, and so that they won't find Kirk, so he'll be able to make his way back. And, you know, she tells him, which is very interesting. She, you know, like you said, she kisses him. She says, "Live long and prosper and remember," which that feels very familiar. And we don't see her again, but we do see Kirk at Starfleet Command, and he's talking to one of the admirals who, and not just an admiral, but the chief of operations, who tells him, you know, look, what happened was not your fault. And, which is something that obviously Kirk was living with. But we also learn that there isn't a record of the aliens that attacked the Farragut, and therefore nobody really believes Kirk about these aliens. And so Kirk kind of finds himself in a place where there's only one other person in the galaxy that he knows what's happened, and is worried that this might be something bigger than just a one-off attack. And so this kind of sets in motion something that's going to continue throughout the rest of the comic. And it makes for, I think, again, these flashbacks are really interesting because they just keep building this as we move forward to see where these aliens keep showing up and why. And it helps explain then how and why these aliens are doing what they're doing when we finally get the explanation for that.
I don't know if it was a satisfying explanation, but we at least do get some explanation as to why they are attacking. Yeah.
I think probably the best thing to do is to talk about the next flashback, because even though we kind of move back to the present, that part isn't quite as important as getting to the next flashback, which is where we find the next encounter with these aliens, which is going to be after the Doomsday incident, which is really fascinating. And it kind of gives us a taste as to what's going on. I mean, it seems to be quite these large interstellar incidents that's making this happen. And Kirk and the crew, after they've faced off with the Doomsday device, they get a call, basically. And it turns out that it is Tricell with two Romulan ships, one kind of the classic and the other, with the look of the Klingon, warship.
Romulans now using Klingon design.
I know, it's shocking. So, and Kirk decides to take some of the crew and beam aboard the Romulan ship, and what do we find? They're being attacked by these aliens.
Right. Before commenting on that, I will just say that the part that we're skipping over, where they're back in San Francisco and in orbit with the Enterprise A, the one important part about that, though, is it's more of a setup for later. But the idea of debt of honor is that Kirk's crew from the Enterprise, they all want to help him, and they're all kind of going behind the back of Starfleet to prepare for the mission that they're going to go on. So it does show that loyalty that they have to Kirk and that feeling of debt that even they have to him, probably for saving their lives for so many years. So there is that connection set up there.
Well, and then in that chapter we meet Janie Finney, who has been continually trying to live in a way to make up for the mistakes of her own father. And again, so all of these characters that we're going to meet throughout the story, many of them feel as though they have this debt of honor to pay off. And so the whole thing is about them trying to find a way. In some ways, this book is about penance.
Yeah. So using the Doomsday Machine, this was also interesting because, again, it gives us a moment to reorient ourselves on the timeline again, a major event with which we're familiar, but we're not replaying the events of that episode. We're seeing events that tie into that moment in some other way that we haven't seen before. And yeah, that idea that when some kind of major galactic or interstellar event happens, a ship is sent to investigate, and then these critters attack that one ship. That's their mode of attack, as we learn. And I don't know if the Doomsday Machine's appearance is really such a big interstellar event. The problem I have with the explanation of how the critters are making the attacks is, how do they know that these events are taking place? And then how do they get themselves there? If there's a single gateway near the Romulan neutral zone, which is the only point at which they can enter our galaxy, because they come from another galaxy, actually.
Yeah,
How is all this happening?
They're scanning the temporal timeline, I think. No, I'm just making this up. I have no idea.
It could be. I mean, that makes sense within Star Trek, right? maybe Daniels was really a critter.
Oh, that's it. That's
yeah.
it. Yes. And in one of those timelines, he had fallen through the universe and gotten captured by them. And then that's how they found out they could go to this other universe and try to conquer it.
It might be it. Yeah.
I love it. It totally works.
Another thing I love about this section, though, is I talked at the beginning about how the artists get to play with the uniforms. And here we get the classic Romulan commander uniform, like we saw in the Enterprise incident, for example. Tessel is wearing the gray and crimson and the black boots, and also the hair style. The way they draw her, I think, really captures that original series Romulan look very well.
No, I agree, and I love that. They get on this ship, they help defeat these aliens, and it turns out that Tessel is the captain of this ship. And I love that Kirk's like, you! And she's like, I'm flattered, you remember. He's like, I suspect you made sure somehow I'd never forget. And so you really do, again, have this connection between these two characters. But this is where we kind of start to piece things together on the fact that it is these major celestial events that seem to be the catalyst for the alien incursions. And this is also where we learn in a meeting between them that's not as private as they might have liked, which is that she is half Romulan and half Vulcan. And of course, back in the day, who would have known that they looked like each other? And so when she was found on that station, they just thought that she was one of them. And she's been playing the role ever since. And what she says is, she's found her first best destiny, which is to be a captain, much like Kirk. And she's kind of a maverick as well. And before she leaves, she gives him a data card so that until they meet again, they have a way to contact each other. And so, again, kind of creating this relationship together, which, it's just kind of neat to see Kirk. Like, it's not just a physical relationship. Like, there's a real respect that these two characters seem to have for each other. And I think it makes for a more fascinating star-crossed relationship as well. So, I mean, you do kind of get almost a Romeo and Juliet thing, especially since, she's a Romulan and he's for the Federation and their parents don't like each other.
Well, and the fact that she gives him that card so they have a way to communicate is great contrast with Jillian, because she didn't give Kirk a card when they left the council chamber at the end of Star Trek 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, here Tessel's a little bit more organized and forward-thinking, I think.
It's very true. It's very true. I do love, before we get to the next flashback, that we're stealing the Enterprise again. It's great. It's just fantastic. So apparently, you just need to get a LoJack for that thing or something, because like
I'm picturing someone down like on Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco selling T-shirts that say like USS Enterprise, Starfleet's most stolen ship.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, man. So the next major interstellar incident that we're going to visit in a flashback is after the motion picture, which obviously this one makes a lot of sense. And Kirk and crew, when, he tells Sulu to indulge himself, they find their way to this basically Klingon boneyard. We've got these ships that have been destroyed in the wake of Voyager coming through, and it turns out there's a Klingon ship there that was not destroyed by Voyager. It very much looks like it was destroyed or taken over by something else. And who should show up but Tessel at this point as well, and they board this Klingon ship, and there's a big secret behind this ship, and they're quite lucky that most of it was destroyed.
Yeah, and this was a moment where it helps a little bit with clarifying how the critters are using these interstellar events as a moment of attack, because in the motion picture, we see the Klingon ships that become enveloped by the V'ger cloud, and they're essentially digitized, I guess is the best way to explain it. Right? They vanish. But here, finding a ship that has been destroyed by some other means helps to clarify the difference between what's happening with these events and the ships. Again, going back to the uniforms, we get to see something that we didn't get to see on screen, which is kind of cool. In addition to the motion picture uniforms here, we get to see what a Romulan commander uniform would have looked like during the motion picture. Because
hers is a slightly more elaborate than I think maybe that they would have had on screen. She's got it's a really nice look, honestly. It looks like it is straight out of the early 80s. Massive shoulder pads, so.
Right.
Which is funny because it's a great link to what we would get in TNG.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's true.
Well, and so we find out about this Klingon ship that it was actually housed a weapon that basically could put a hole through a planet. It's a planet killer. Right. And what's really fascinating here is to see Kirk and Tressel make the decision to not tell their governments about the discovery of this ship, because they know if either side learned about this, that they would probably go to war with the Klingon Empire. And that's not what either of them want for either of their countries, because the loss of life could be catastrophic. And I just thought this is a really interesting thing, because, again, we keep seeing these places where Kirk is having to make these decisions, but it's also kind of interesting to see a Romulan be willing to make those decisions as well for the same reasons. And so it really creates, I think, this section specifically, I think, creates a really nice bond between these characters in a way where we can really see that they think alike, and they very much are alike. They're both these mavericks, and they do things by their own rules, but really for the best of all people involved, not just people on their side. The fact that Tressel would be thinking like this obviously shows that she cares about more than just, obviously, the Romulan people. Right.
Well, and the fact that the Romulans might take that position, or a leader among the Romulans might take that position, it sort of highlights to me how in the original series, we viewed the Klingons as representing the Russians, right, as the Soviet Union, and the Romulans as the Chinese, and then that flipped a lot. And by the time you get to the next generation, it's really the Romulans who more represent the Russians. And as a parallel to the real world, there are always these moments, these discoveries, these things that happen in the real world which could lead to war if a government is too reactionary. But the reason we don't generally have these huge wars is because governments are less reactionary to those things. So if you take the Soviet Union or the Russian government now, or the American government, or even the Chinese government, they're going to generally try to de-escalate something. So here, by them agreeing that we can't make the existence of this planet killer Klingon ship known because it could lead to war, I think that does show how in the real world a similar thing would happen. Like we need to keep this under wraps so that we can diffuse the situation, figure it out, so that there's not just a sudden flashpoint. Because, Kirk says here that, the Federation probably would go to war with the Klingons as well, but maybe with a bit of hesitation, whereas Tressel says, the Romulans would definitely go to war and would not relent until every last Klingon is destroyed. And that would not be good for the Romulan civilization either, because all their resources would be expended. Not just the loss of life, but material resources, financial resources, everything would be expended on something that's fueled pretty much by passion, not by intellect or the needs of the people.
Well, and that's why their decision is then to take the schematics of this weapon that they've found, and they are going to give them to all three governments. And I love how, Kirk puts it, presto, an instant balance of terror, but at least there's a balance. And what we really learn here, though, is that's also missing, right? Like this is something that the aliens have as well, and Kirk believes the aliens will be back. And then I love the end of this section because he asked herself, come with us. There's no reason for you to go back. The Federation was once your home. And she's like, no, the Phoenix is my home, and that's the name of her ship, just as much as the Enterprise is yours. And if keeping her means I have to leave what I once held dear, so be it. And she leaves. But she does tell him, call me maybe, or, call me whenever you need help, and I'll be there, especially if it has to do with these aliens. And so this is where we flash back, and the present takes over.
He's got a lot of song lyrics ready to go right there.
He does. So,
but that's sort of how Kirk is too, right? Kirk stealing the Enterprise in Star Trek 3. It's like, if I have to leave everything behind, I will, right? Yep. So this is another example of how Kirk and Tassel are very much of the same mind. And it is the reason why they can't leave each other's lives throughout all these years. They keep coming back together.
Kirk and Saavik are waiting for the Enterprise to show up, and the Enterprise is right on time. And this is where Kirk learns, because Kirk is not expecting the Enterprise. He doesn't want the Enterprise to be here. He's thinking that they're doing this, and they've had another ship that's going to be showing up. And it turns out to be the Enterprise. And not only is it the Enterprise, but it's a bunch of familiar faces, because Uhura and Commander Rand have made sure that they have stocked the Enterprise full of old friends like Riley and Bailey and Stiles and Kyle and Carolyn Palamas, like all of these people that we know, but all people who want to help Jim Kirk in his time of need, which, I know it's a little bit silly, but I think there's also a sense of something that's really nice here, which again was what this comic is all about, this debt of honor. These people that we feel like we owe our lives to and we owe our allegiance to because of the things that they've been willing to do for us. And I think there's a real beauty to that. It's not a transactional thing. Kirk doesn't expect these people to be here because he did something for them. They just happen to be there because they want to be there, because that's what they know Jim Kirk would do if the roles were reversed. And I think this is one of the things that, makes Star Trek so special, and especially this time period of the TOS, is that it really is about people finding ways to be there for one another regardless of their differences, right? And isn't that something the world needs more of?
Well, not only does he get greeted by all of these people who he's known from the past, he even gets a greeting passed along to him by Commander Baylock of the First Federation. So
yes,
truly,
that was really fun.
Truly everybody is there. But yeah, I think he would rather most of these people not be there because he knows how dangerous it is. And if they get killed due to him, that's yet another thing that's going to be weighing on him.
Well, and it's one of the things that's hard for him to take when he gets up to the Enterprise and Jamie Finney is sitting in the command seat because she was the senior officer there on the Enterprise, because everybody else was, meeting Kirk. And so, and then, of course, we get hailing frequencies, and we've got even more friends showing up.
Exactly.
It's just like a friends reunion.
It's a friends reunion, yeah.
I'll be there for you.
I will say one of my first thoughts, though, was, is it really a good idea to have all of these people in this one spot? It's that moment in Star Trek. It's like in Into Darkness where They gather like all the command in one room. Like, it's not the best idea. You know, it makes for great storytelling in cinema. In reality, you would want to have these people in different locations, right?
Yeah. What makes this great, though, is that we finally get a piece of the story from the part where we were visiting after the motion picture, where Core kind of lays out the reason why he's here. And it has to do with the way in which the difference between the Klingons, they explain that here, and why we see a power shift between those.
Right.
And it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
I think I was like very surprised to see that. And I felt like it was, you know, obviously with next to Worf just saying, we don't talk about it. This was a great explanation, I think.
Yeah, you know, that point, it keeps coming up, and between on screen and in the lit verse, we've gotten so many explanations for why we have smooth-headed Klingons and why we have ridged forehead Klingons, and they're often very interesting. You know, Enterprise tried to explain it as well through a way that made sense but was perhaps overly complicated. But here we have another explanation, as you say, to slot in during what we see in the motion picture. And, of course, having Core come back is also fun. And although we don't get a flashback, like we got a flashback to something connected to Obsession, and we got a flashback to something connected to the Doomsday Machine, here we get Errand of Mercy because we have Core, but we don't actually go back to those events. But it's yet another reference to relationships that Kirk built during his career as a Starfleet captain that remain a thread running through his life, which is also an interesting idea, because when you transplant that from, say, our own lives here on this little planet that we live on, when you transplant that to a galactic scale, and yet you find that these people and these relationships keep coming back together anyway.
Yeah, I think I really like, too, that we learn that, you know, the ship that was attacked was from this part of the race of Klingons that Core is a part of. And because of the loss of that, it has caused disgrace, and it's gained, it's allowed the Klingons that we kind of know from then the motion picture onward to gain prominence. And that for him, obviously, getting this back is his debt of honor. And so all of them are together here to figure this out. And it's really interesting, because at this point, this is where the rest of the story, again, we're here for the rest in the present, where we're going to bring all of this together. And I kind of loved that. Really, one of the coolest parts of this that I loved is little tiny Jamie Finney just kicking the crap out of a Klingon and then becoming a part of the Klingon crew in the end.
Right. Seeing her run around in the Klingon uniform is fun through the rest of the comic. Yeah.
It's pretty hysterical. So the big thing, the big plan here is the fact that they know what just happened recently with the whale probe is the perfect time. It's the perfect type of interstellar incident to cause these aliens to arrive. And so the Enterprise and the Phoenix are going to basically kind of join together, be under the Phoenix's cloak, and they're going to use Core's ship as bait so that they can finally find a way to stop these aliens from coming through once and for all. And in that, we meet another interesting character, Chris, named Kirk. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that Kirk might have lost a son, but he's gained a daughter.
Exactly. You know, the first time I saw her name, I didn't think about it like that. But as the story goes on, you start to think, and then you flash back to, as you mentioned earlier, after Tassel and Kirk did the saucer separation. They have some time together in the shuttle, and you start wondering, yeah, maybe. And then you think, okay, Tessell, time and again, tries to encourage Kirk for them to be together and to realize their own best destinies, which is to be captains of ships and explore and work outside the framework of their respective organizations. So she has this incredible fondness for Kirk, and she named her daughter to Kerr. And then you think, okay, yeah, maybe this is Kirk's daughter. Once again, an offspring that Kirk doesn't know about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's really interesting. And I think the fascinating thing about it to me is that it really does add a dimension that I would have loved to have seen followed up later on, for Kirk having this daughter who, like her mother, who never felt comfortable with the Vulcan half of her, found her comfort level. This is a daughter who has never found comfort in the Romulan half of her, but she has always wanted to explore more of her human side. And so now she will get an opportunity to do that through the end of this comic. And I think that would have been something fascinating to kind of see Kirk, especially, we're going to have these events. And, I think it's kind of thought in Star Trek that they go on another 5-year mission, possibly after with the Enterprise A, and then the events of Star Trek 6 happen. But man, wouldn't it be interesting? And this is where I think Star Trek books should go. Give us this story, basically. Give us that story, And so,
well, the story, it's set up here in the comic because
yes,
there is the moment where Kirk, tells her that it would be his honor to help her, find herself, her find herself. Yeah, he says it will be my pride and privilege to help you learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we could kind of talk through in detail, but I don't think it needs to be talked into a ton of detail. But what did you think of the wrap up here of this comic, of everything that happens? Because we get the aliens attacking, we get the Kirk beaming over to the Klingon ship to help them. They end up beating the aliens back. They end up finding out where these aliens are from through a face that we saw at the beginning. We saw the officer from the Farragut, Marwood, back, and she has been turned into one of these aliens, and it's like, you've got to destroy us,
right,
or everybody's going to die. So what did you think of how this all ends up wrapping up?
Well, in terms of the critters and all, this storyline of the critters infiltrating our space and threatening the future of our civilizations is necessary as an impetus for the story to bring together Kirk and Tessell and Core and to put the Enterprise A on this grand mission. And it creates all the moments through which Kirk can reflect on his life and try to find himself again. So in that respect, I think it worked well. I don't feel like it makes a whole lot of sense personally, but that's the case with many of these types of storylines in Star Trek, where the future of all life is at stake. It's like a recurring theme of Star Trek Discovery.
Right.
Every season, the galaxy is going to end. Even season 1 of Picard is like that as well. So that's just something that they do. What I found more interesting about the overall resolution of the comic, though, is once we get back on Earth, Kirk goes back to the boat. He's with Julian again. And we get a couple of nice payoffs here. One is that we get to see a whale being born for the first time in over 300 years. And that was a nice resolution to their mission in Star Trek 4, to bring the whales to the future. And now we see that, okay, George and Gracie came to the future and they are able to have an offspring.
Yes.
Which was sort of the point of that. So that was nice. And then the other thing, I think that, on the final page, we see Kirk and Julian toasting. to new life. And Kirk says, and perhaps a new civilization. But then on the last page, he says, and to the friends I found along the way who've enriched my life and made the journeys past and those yet to come well worth the making. And it's the journeys yet to come part that I really like, because if you go all the way back to the beginning of Star Trek II and you see how down Kirk is about his future, and he feels he's getting old, and he feels like his career's kind of dried up and he's going to be stuck behind this desk. And then even at the beginning of this comic, he's still, he's really struggling with things that have happened. But now I feel like he sees a bright future.
Yes.
And that he's worked through those problems through this story. And maybe Jillian's even a part of that future for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final two frames says the end and the beginning. So I think they wrapped up the comic really well. And I think they did a good job throughout telling the story they wanted to tell and making the point they wanted to make.
Yeah, to me, too, one of the things that really happens, and like you said, there's these overarching big things happening, but really I think it does come down. The beauty of this is it's more about the character stories that are happening, and everyone kind of finding a way to pay off their debt of honor, come to an understanding of who they are better through that journey. And then as well as we really find out, the thing that I think makes the relationship between Kirk and Tercel really special is that they do truly understand one another. She asks him to come with her when all of this is over, that they could explore the galaxy together. And yet she knows that Kirk is not going to be able to say yes to that, because she also understands the love he has for being on the bridge of the Enterprise. And what I really appreciate about that is that they truly love each other and they accept each other for who they are and don't ask for them to be different than that, which I think is really special. And, for her, she sacrifices her life and ends up going on the other side of this major rift that happens. And then she's going to be exploring a whole new galaxy. And hopefully, who knows, their paths might cross again one day. You never know. But I really just liked that because it really was so much more about understanding, and truly understanding somebody and not trying to make them somebody you want them to be, but just accepting them for who they are. And I think, again, that's also kind of a Star Trek message, right? And you get that as well in the relationship that Kirk now has with this daughter that he has just found out he has, and the fact that she's going to want to be exploring something that she hasn't been able to explore, which is her humanity. And then, like you said, too, we end on that relationship between him and Jillian, which gives a lot more depth, again, to all of that than anything we ever got in the film, because they just didn't have time for that. And so I really like this comic. I think, regardless of how I feel about the overarching story of the aliens coming through, it's just a vehicle for them to really tell a character-driven story and to get to the emotion of, and that's what I kind of like. It's really meant to drive us to the emotion of what's going on the inside of these characters. And again, that's Star Trek, right? Is we tell these overarching stories to help to get to the human condition and explain that to us. And so I could care less about whether or not all of that works. The rest of this comic works for me gangbusters. So I guess in the end, it makes me wonder, Chris, what would you rate Debt of Honor?
Oh, well, I would have to give this comic 9 out of 10 baby whales.
Nice. Excellent.
And how about you?
I think that I'm going to have to give this, I would also give this 9 out of 10, but I'm going to give it Romulan Commander uniforms from the motion picture era. So, because they're that good.
Specifically that one.
Exactly.
I also realized, Matthew, just now that this comic was published in 1992. And so Tercel, she was really ahead of her time, because by heading off to that other galaxy where the critters are from, if this were today, Paramount Plus, I mean, she just wrote herself into a spinoff series.
She really did. See, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you could write an entire, and this is one of the things I would love to see Star Trek books do, since they're now going to be kind of mining more of these eras. This is an era I think you could mine, maybe use this story a little bit as a catalyst, and like have Kirk have his daughter on the ship, have the ability for Kirk to also maybe run into Tricell again on that 5-year mission, with the Enterprise A. Heck, that would be fascinating. So there's so many storytelling opportunities here still, even in this era, that we've never gotten to explore. So forget the 5-year mission era. Give us the movie era. I think that's the way to go. So,
yeah.
Well, super fun that we got a chance to talk about this, Chris. And we do want to say, of course, a huge thank you to our associate producers here through Patreon, Greg Rosier and Casey Petit. We really appreciate them supporting the network and Literary Treks to make sure that the shows keep coming to you each and every week. And everyone knows, I think, but we do want to mention we could definitely use your support. It's a very expensive enterprise to put this on each and every week for all the shows that we have. We're continuing to reform at the network, and we've got some great things coming up for you this year. We're excited for that. So please go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you could be part of our team. In the end, every little bit helps, but we do have some cool contribution levels you can give at as well. So, Chris, where else can they find us online?
Well, if you'd like to share your thoughts on the story, if you've read this comic or you read it after this and want to talk to us about it, you can find us on Twitter. Our username there as a network is TrekFM. You can also go to Facebook, where we have our listeners group called the Babel Conference. Just type BABEL into the search field on Facebook and it should come up. But if it doesn't, just type the Babel Conference. That is a closed group, so if you're not yet a member, you'll need to request to join, and you'll need to answer the questions that are there so that we know you're a listener. But that's a great place to talk to us and other listeners about the stories. And if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter. My username is CBryanJones. That's the letter C and Bryan with a Y. That's where I'm most active, although that is my username elsewhere in social media. And if you want to drop Matthew and me a line by good old traditional email, you can do that by going to the website trek.fm/contact and use the form there and choose Literary Treks as the show, and that'll come to both of us. Now, Matthew, when you're not, sewing your Romulan commander uniform for your cosplay once in-person conventions are a thing again, where can people find you?
Well, you could find me all over the place, MattRushing02 on any social media platform that I'm on. Just search for that. Of course, here on the network, I'm also doing the 602 Club, where we're talking about all of the fandoms we love. So make sure you check that out. Of course, there we've got our other show in that feed called Snyder Cuts, where John Mills and I have been talking through everything Zack Snyder's directed as we got to his Justice League. And we've got some other shows coming up in that as well for you. Of course, doing The Orb with you, Chris, about Deep Space Nine, as you mentioned. And then over on the Nerd Party Network, Drea Kaufman and I, we are wrapping up the Harry Potter series. We've been doing that one chapter at a time on Owl Posts, so you can check that out. It's a perfect listen. If you just started the series, if you've already read the series, check it out. And then, of course, doing Aggressive Negotiations there with John Mills each and every week as well as we talk about Star Wars.
I should also mention, I didn't mention any podcasts a moment ago, but Larry Nemechek and I do have a new episode of The Ready Room out where we're finally looking back at Star Trek Discovery Season 3. If you're interested in that, you can catch us over there. And as Matthew mentioned, we've got some orbs coming up and have a few other things in the hopper as well. Well, Matthew, it was really fun, swimming with the kiddies with you today, with Julian there, George and Gracie, and also shooting some bugs, but I'm looking forward to next time on Literary Treks when we jump into a different story.
Well, Chris, that sounds like a lot of fun. We do want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. And until next time, live long and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.